it perfectly before. I don't even know what this is. Okay, let's do it again. Okay, let's do it like this. Who would have thought that the presentation would be the thing bugging me, technically? Very well. Dokku is your very own Heroku. So what does that mean? It means... Okay. I don't even, what, you know. Use Safari. Hey, I should, maybe. Let's get this one more try. At least there's beer in the meantime. Yeah. You know, I tried this maybe 10 times before you got here. It was working perfectly. Ah, what do you know? Thanks. So, Dokku, just like Heroku, is platform as a service. In essence, this means that you can deploy code, do installation, have it do the builds, and bundle the environment in one single step. So platform as a service as opposed to software as a service where we rent a complete service like hosted Exchange or Salesforce, and as opposed to infrastructure as a service where you would rent rack space, internet, maybe the bare metal, maybe an OS. So, how does it work? Well, just like Heroku, you set up your project using Git as the version control. You add a new remote pointing to your Dokku server, and then you push the latest code, and everything just works. The code is deployed, the dependencies are installed automatically, everything is built, a host name is assigned, etc., etc. So, what can you use it for? You can use it for Ruby. You can use it for Node.js, which is probably the most interesting platform for you guys here. I know it is for me anyway. You can use it for Java, if you absolutely need to. You can use it for Play, Python, PHP, Clojure, Go, Dart, or you can build your own build pack to support something else that you like. Dokku is built on a number of building blocks. The most important one, the brains behind the operation doing the heavy lifting, is called Docker. Docker is a virtualization platform. I'm going to speak a little bit more about that later because it contains a very interesting take on virtualization. It contains a number of helper projects that the people making Dokku created for doing the builds for different platforms. Git receive, which helps receiving the pushes that you do to the Dokku server. Some help for plugins and running commands in the terminal, and finally Nginx to handle all of the routing from like the outside interface into the correct Docker virtualized engine. So, an important question, why? There's already Heroku. Well, it's your own Heroku. For me, that's all the reason I need. Maybe you need other reasons, so let's go into them. Let's think about, for a while, how we build applications today. Nowadays, we put together a number of functional blocks that do their own separate specialized task. We used to think a lot in layers a couple of years ago. There used to be a data layer, maybe there was an object mapping layer, a business logic layer running on some sort of application server, or even worse, BizTalk or something, handling messaging between different applications. And then you had your front end. And hand in hand with the layer thinking was often monolithic engines, like BizTalk, or the company spent hundreds of thousands on this Oracle server, you better use it. I don't care if it's not a good tool for your project, use it now. Nowadays, instead of trying to implement queues, document storage, etc. in SQL, you would use a specialized queue function like RabbitMQ, and you would use a NoSQL database like Mongo. Apart from not being locked into certain engines and platforms, this also actually helps you think scalable. Having these different building blocks communicate with each other makes it easier to separate them into different servers. It makes it easier to scale, add servers, shard out the Mongo database, etc. And you start thinking this way right from the start, instead of adding another 100,000 somethings for a clustered Oracle database. It also supports something that I call Freestyle Development that we do a lot. Proof of concept is a very important part early in our projects. Before spending loads of hours on something that you think is a good idea, why not test it? So you test it in a controlled environment and try to think of all the parameters that could change, etc. And what's really good about platform as a service is that you have an instant test environment. The threshold, the hurdle, the step from development to release is very small. So as soon as you think of something and it works on your computer, you can push it to your platform as a service server, and it will just work the same way. And you can invite clients or other team members to partake in the proof of concept. Another good thing is that it actually handles the interface between developers and operations, I should say. Developers should, and with this they can, create and maintain the application environment. So the specific building blocks, specific libraries, etc. is handled by developers because we are the ones knowing what we need. Operations create, maintain, and monitor the host environment. And operations, without help of developers, can move and scale these different platforms that you deploy without the help of the developers. So, a little bit about Docker. Like I said, Docker is the real brain. Dokku is just a layer on top of it, helping you with starting the builds and receiving the Git pushes, etc. But we're going to look back all the way to the 60s, to the history of the shipping container. Before 1960, everything you would ship in a haphazard mess. Furniture, boxes, barrels, bags, anything. You would just put on a ship and you would secure it, hopefully. This means it's very difficult to shift between transport methods. It's difficult to optimize because chairs might not fit in a good way together, and you can't really predict. There's no reason to be alarmed. The projector is just a little bit flaky. It'll come back. It's not very secure. Your anvils that you're shipping could easily fall on top of your bananas and ruin part of your goods. In 1960, the shipping container arrived with standard measurements made out of metal. You could actually ship anything in a standardized way. It's protected because all of your goods is inside this metal shell. It can stay enclosed all of the way, no matter how many different transport methods you're using. The shippers never need to open your container. Customs might have to, but shippers don't need to. It's also easy to load them. You can build specialized cranes that just move stuff between ships and trains or trucks. And it's optimized because you know how large the containers are and you can easily fit them into a space. You can calculate and you can draw new ships that are perfect for shipping containers. So, taking this metaphor to the software world, the Docker container. The Docker container is a virtual machine, sort of. Not really, but it's like a virtual machine, it's self-contained. Unlike a virtual machine, it's not complete. It's going to, where applicable, use libraries and resources of the host to make it as lightweight as possible. It's isolated, it has its own file system, it has its own memory space, but it's still like a virtual machine, but it's still lightweight. And it's very easy to move containers between different hosts. There's even a repository function that you can use. It's a sort of Git-like function that you can push and pull your containers to a repository, and then you can push them from one server and pull them to another server. So even the transport is handled. The cranes lifting the containers are already there. So, fun with containers. It's got what apps crave, which isn't the electrolytes, it's all of your dependencies that you want. If something goes wrong, you don't have to restart a full virtual machine, so it's very quick. There's a history based on snapshots. That can be done in virtual machines as well, but that's usually pretty heavy and takes a lot of space. In this case, with Docker containers, it's based on diffs. So small changes will result in very small snapshots. It's easy to move, and it shares, like I said, it shares resources a lot better than a full virtual machine. So, what do you need? You need a Linux server for hosting. Right now, Dokku was built by people using Ubuntu 13.04, 64-bit, so that's the really easiest way to go with the same. And this is usually an option available in most major hosting environments like Amazon and DigitalOcean. It should probably work just fine on other Linux flavors as well. You need Git, of course, and you need one of the supported languages, or you can build your own build pack. Maybe you won't start out doing that, but later on, who knows. So, and other stuff that you need, there are plugins for things like data stores. These plugins work in slightly different ways, but let's say, for example, the MongoDB one, it installs a separate container with the Mongo database, because really Mongo doesn't share memory very well, and so on, different instances. Instead, this plugin provides, just like in Heroku, prefabricated environment variables that are injected into your container. So if you run this plugin, you have access to things like Mongo connection string, username, password, etc. So as soon as you deploy it, they're already there. Similar for other databases like MariaDB, Postgres, Redis, Riak, etc. There is also plugin support for process managers that will handle zombified processes, restarting node instances that have died, etc. Plugins for handling more complex configurations and environment variables. There's a plugin for using Node as a development tool. Let's say you have a Python project, but you want to use Grunt for a number of things like concatenation or less compilation, etc. So you can actually use a different build pack, but then have Node as a development tool, as a plugin, and Chef for creating recipes. Okay, so why not use Heroku? There is Heroku. Okay, this sounds great, but Heroku is just there. You can use it. And there are a few drawbacks with Dokku, actually. Doesn't handle Git submodules, which Heroku does. Cloning a repository inside your own project as a submodule. There's no throttling in Dokku. There is some throttling in Docker, but in the Dokku layer itself, there's no throttling. You can't just add dynos like you can in Heroku if the load just accelerates. There's no .NET. For most of you, probably that's not a problem. For me, that's sometimes a problem. I use JavaScript and .NET all the time, both of them. There's no client application, so some tasks like viewing the logs and managing your Docker containers, especially when something bugs out, requires you to log into the Dokku host using the terminal. But then again, there are some things that are much better with Dokku than Heroku. first and most important one is control. There's been a lot of heat for Roku after changing their routing between dynos. That's nothing that you have to worry about when you have your own environment. Any dyno that doesn't start up in 60 seconds on Roku is killed and restarted. I think your application should probably start in less than 60 seconds, but who knows? You don't have to worry about that. There are no request limits when it comes to time. I think Roku has 30 seconds or something. The biggest dyno you can create on Roku is 1 gigabyte of memory. With Dokku you can decide for yourself. No dynos are retired. If you have a single dyno Heroku project, it will just go to sleep at a determined time after the last request, which can make smaller applications very, very slow if they're not used often. And the startup itself can be so slow that it can create its own kind of problems with timeouts. No problems with that. You have your own environment. And then price. Dokku is free. For a really large-scale project, probably Heroku pricing isn't a problem. Especially for personal projects, as soon as you start to move those sliders around, the dollars start adding. Just adding one dyno is $35 a month. Not a big problem for a client or a big project, but it could be a problem when you start to scale up. Of course, you have to have a host environment, so unless you have a computer just standing around, you probably have to pay something for cloud hosting, right? But DigitalOcean smallest version is $5 a month. That's nothing. Right, and I'm going to do a demo. Like a good TV chef, I prepared some things. I started up an Ubuntu instance on DigitalOcean. I did some DNS mapping. Dokku works best if you map 2 records to your Dokku hosting environment. One is the name of the actual host, and the other one is a wildcard mapping for the same host name. Because Dokku, as soon as you push a new project, it's going to assign a new subdomain to it, so it gets its own DNS host name. If you don't have access to this, you can still use it because Dokku is going to use ports instead, but it's cooler this way. And on my development machine, I have generated a public SSH key, not specifically for this presentation, but yeah, there's one there. And I've installed Git. So let's see. What I'm going to do now is actually from a bare installation of Ubuntu install Dokku, including getting all of the binaries and the dependencies. As soon as we get some. There we are. So I'm going to log into to the Dokku machine. Using the correct password. Out of the oven, I'm going to take this installation string that I couldn't remember by heart. And this might actually be a good time for questions, because this is going to take a very short while for an installation like this, but it's going to take maybe 2, 3, 4 minutes, depending on DigitalOcean's connection to the Ubuntu repositories. Any questions so far? Yeah?
Have you checked out Orchard?
Orchard?
Yeah.
No, sorry. What is that?
That's the hosted version of Docker.
All right.
So it's like Heroku, but not Heroku, but it's...
It sounds awesome. It sounds just like Dokku. Yeah, I love it. No, sorry, I haven't. So I can't make any comparisons. So this is a little bit like watching paint dry, but at least some things are happening in the meantime. Other questions?
we'll try it.
It works?
Yes, it works. All right. How separated are apps on Dokku from each other in terms of security? As in, like, shared databases or memory spaces and so forth?
The memory is isolated completely between the different instances. Of course, you never ever completely protected from like bugs in a platform, but the memory is isolated. The file system is isolated. If you're using one of the plugins like Mongo that installs a single container Mongo database for different applications, of course they're going to share a database, so that's going to be.
But is it more or less secure than, for example, using JRoot or something like that?
If
you would compare it to JRoot or something like that?
I'm not sure I can make a comparison, actually.
All right.
Hello, up here in the balcony.
Yeah.
So you were saying that it's lightweight, I guess, compared to like a virtual server. How lightweight?
That depends on how much you actually. I haven't made any measurements on how much a Docker container would use compared to a virtual server. But virtual server has a complete operating system which always has services running in the background, things happening. In a Docker container, unless you use the application, it doesn't consume anything more than the memory that it's actually using for storage.
Thank you.
So, there will be more time for questions later on. I'm just going to complete the demo now. Like you saw, in a couple of minutes, all of the components needed for Dokku were downloaded and installed. And now there are two things we have to do to start using our new Dokku server. One is listed at the bottom here. You need to upload a public key for your user. So a public key from your development computer needs to be uploaded into the Dokku machine. And that's for the Git user that's been created now to use when it receives the pushes. The other thing that you have to do is create a file inside the home directory of the newly created Git user, which is called vhost. So, and this file only needs one line, and that's the name, the database name that you've mapped to this Dokku server. So, Sthlm.js item.se. Did I spell that right? Yeah. I think Sthlm.js is one of the most difficult words on this planet to spell, actually. So, writing that, that's one. The other thing that we need to do is upload our key from our development machine. So this right-hand side terminal is now my development machine. The left-hand side is the Dokku server. So we are going to just use this helpful message that's at the end of the Dokku installation. We're going to. Sorry. One thing that it doesn't say, that's almost always a requirement, is that you need to run this command as sudo git read c. So if you're successful, you should see the checksum. This means, does this mean it wasn't successful? This means that that your public key from your development computer has now been added to the Git user's authorized keys on the Dokku machine. So for a very simple demonstration of what it actually does, I've set up something that's very similar to the test app on Roku using a very simple Node.js server with Express. So we can check out No? So, I've done the installations of the dependencies on my machine, so you won't have to watch that. I've installed Express. I've set up the package.json to require Node, Express, etc. A very simple route, just sending hello world. You can change this to hello Stockholm when you go to the root directory of the site. Just like with Heroku, you have some environment variables provided for you. So the port on which this application should listen is just available to the application once it's pushed into the Dokku machine. I've also used console log to have something output, so that I can show you how to view the logs a little bit later on. So inside of this project, to push things into the machine, we use git remote add, and then a name for the remote, and then it's git. It's always, the user is always git, no matter what your root user on the Dokku machine is. There's always a new user created called git, and then a name of the server, and then a name of your application, and then we commit the changes that we made, and we push them into our newly created remote. We're pushing the master branch. That's actually a requirement right now of Dokku, which makes it a little bit unsuitable for maybe for stage branches. You have to push the master branch. It won't accept any other branches being pushed. So for those of you who have used Heroku, this would seem pretty familiar. It will say that it detects it's a web application, it detects it's a Node.js app, actually. It's going to fetch the binaries. I got the question earlier today, do you have to use Node.js 0.8? No, you don't. This is an old demo app. And then finally, if everything goes as planned, you get this. It will output the name of your new application. And if you go into a browser, it will output the thing that you wanted. So when you have the Dokku server in place, if you have a project that you're working on that you just like to push out to show to your clients, to your colleagues, to the parts of your team or anything, it's just as easy as adding the remote and then pushing it, and then it's just working. So if you want to see the logs, one way of doing this is going into the Dokku machine and running Docker. So Dokku is just a layer on top of Docker. A lot of the commands that you use for handling your containers are Docker commands. One such command is ps. That's going to list all of the running containers. If you want to view the logs, you can use Docker logs and then the ID of the container. But Docker is so smart, so you do only have to specify enough for it to be unique. And since there is only one image, you can use only the first character. And there you can see what was piped to standard out as the Express application was started. You can also, if you want to know a little bit more about your container and your application, you can see what settings it's using. All of the Dokku containers get their own internal IP addresses, and then Nginx will route the web requests to the correct container. So here you can see what internal address it's gotten, etc. Another thing, I said there are no client apps for Dokku. There are sort of client apps for Docker. I'm going to show this on a different machine because this requires some changes to the startup of Docker to listen to a number of ports. But there is a project called Shipyard, which is a web interface that allows you to view your images and view what's happening. So I set this up on one of my other Docker machines. So this one has four containers running. One of the containers is actually the web interface itself, Shipyard. and here you can go into the specifics. This is pretty much like inspect, but it's a web version of it. You can attach to it, which will show you the console of your container. You can stop, restart, anything, any basic management that you want to do with your containers from this web interface. And you only need to set Shipyard up on one server because you can add other Dokku servers. So you can have one like control center for all of your Dokku installations. Yes. Hope you're not getting seasick. This is pretty much what I was going to show you today. Small recap. You can release the full application stack and the app in one go. You can do virtualization and differential snapshots without the penalties of full virtual machines. You have full control, and it's much better priced than Heroku. If you want to try it yourself, go here to try it out. And if you want to chat later, do it in person or just connect to me in some way. Connecting to my Twitter account will give you a lovely mix of code and guitar playing. So, any more questions? It's all like crystal.
You got one up here?
Yeah, I was wondering if it's possible to run Dokku if you don't have root access on the.
Sorry,
if you don't have root access on the server.
No, not that I know of. I've never all of the examples and all of the instructions I've seen require root access. I haven't actually bothered to try without it, but I would think no. So I think, but I also think that Dokku and Docker works best in its own hosting, in a separate hosting environment. So you don't mix it with other kinds of regular deployments and stuff like that.
Hello, I'm over other side corner, other looking wrong way. Hello.
What? Oh, sorry.
Is it possible to scale it to like, as with Heroku, you can just add the dynos to your app. Is it possible to scale in some way with Dokku?
Yes, the answer is with Dokku, no. With Docker, yes. So you can scale your. What you're basically doing is telling Docker which applications should have like be preferred over others when resources are running low. So yes, you can scale using Docker, not the Dokku itself.
But not across several machines, like you can still run on your single, like physical machine.
At the moment, in the requests, popular requests section of Dokku's GitHub page, there's a multi-host. They say that's going to be around in Super Dokku. So, well, if that's it.
One more.
Sorry.
One thing to add is that it only works on Ubuntu 14.04, I believe. There are some efforts to break out those parts that uses just the Ubuntu specific stuff, but that's coming in like a few months or something like that.
Right.
So just try it on Ubuntu, the one that Docker specifies.
Yeah.
No one else.
Good advice. Yeah. Well, that's all, folks. For me.